Yeah.
It's called the Justice Reinvestment Program, and it's basically letting a lot of guys loose early. Am I oversimplifying? And is it a good or bad idea, or maybe a little of both?
It's a little of both. One of the things that happened was mandatory minimum sentences, and it took the discretion out of the judge that might know an offender better than the legislators that passed the law, and made us do things that we didn't want to do. And I think that now they're reaping the unintended consequences of being tough on crime, and that sometimes means not using common sense about
What are the unintended consequences?
Right.
What are those?
Well, it's the fact that you have a person that is a first offender decides that they're going to sell cocaine, and because they're in a dire consequence of financial struggle, can't make ends meet, and they decide to do a one-time thing and they get busted. And you have to have a minimum mandatory if they're prosecuted to the maximum, and that person has never done it before, has no criminal record, and they go to prison.
But there is no choice in
There's some of those, and that might not be the best example, but that's the one that comes to mind. And in my 25 years on the bench, I had very little to no sympathy for people who sold drugs, but sometimes you have to look beyond just the fact that they sell drugs. There are reasons that need to be
took the human factor out, if you will.
Well, absolutely, and the legislators, I think they were well-meaning, but they didn't exactly implement it in a common sense way.
Let me ask you, this is supposed to be a reinvest program where the money you save by releasing inmates from jail, you're going to create programs to help them when they get out of jail. Are you suspect of that?
Not at all. I think that this is something that's long overdue, because this is one of the things that we didn't examine in the front end. There are so many, as you know, when the budget cuts come, one of the first things that take hits is mental health services, and that is a disaster in this state. Mental health is a lot of reasons that people are into the system. I mean, the old saying that I used to have, do you do drugs because you're nuts, or you're nuts because you do drugs? Well, you find out you can't separate the two. And yes, those programs, employment, mental health services, continued outpatient, things like AA and community. It takes a community to make this work.
The sheriff here, Steve Prater, going to have a news conference on this today. There's a list we've got at KEELnews.com. 1,400 inmates are going to be released on November 1st. Corrections Department sent this list out. 200 or so of them are in Caddo Bossier. There's some concern from law enforcement that we're going to have more crime. This is going to result in more crime. Is that a concern from the judicial side of this equation?
I wouldn't say it's a concern in the fact that it's fear, but it is certainly something that the judiciary has taken into effect. I mean, this area is blessed with, particularly Caddo and DeSoto parishes also, but you got Justice Scott Creighton, who is probably one of the most eloquent and best speakers regarding common sense. He's a tough on crime guy. Came out of the prosecutor's office, and he has no sympathy for violation of crime, but he also has sense enough and is eloquent enough to know that there are better ways to punish people, or at least deal with the thing. You have James Stewart, who has seen it from all sides: prosecution, district court, court of appeals, and he has got the community looking at and helping him in decisions of making a charge on charging individuals. And I think that's a very, very good approach of bringing the community and listening to what the community expects of the judiciary and of the prosecution. And Steve Prater he's been around as long or longer than I have, and he has his finger on the pulse of this, and he'll do what's necessary to make sure the people of this area are safe.
There are concerns, though, that, yes, the state says they're going to reinvest, but will the money really trickle down? Will it trickle down to DeSoto, to Caddo, to Bossier? We want you to answer that one.
That's the tough one.
Yeah.
Because I know that, for example, and I don't know what others have done it, but Judge Beasley and I used to be a part of the 11th Judicial District, DeSoto and Sabine. Judge Beasley has a reentry court down there where he monitors the people that are going to be released into into the community down there and helps them with all these services. That's going to be part of the equation. The money, whether it trickles down from the state or not, each parish is going to have a reality check, and if they have these people, they're going to have to do it themselves. You can't rely on the state because, as we know, once that money's loosed up, there's always some hand out there to grab it.
We had DA Marvin, Skylar Marvin, on last week, and he was, I think it's fair to say, a little critical of this plan. From the judicial people, from the judges I've talked to, from the lawyers I've talked to, they seem to think it ain't the worst thing in the world. But on the law enforcement side, they're a little more critical. Why is there that disconnect, do you think?
Lack of communication and maybe participation in the process. I don't know exactly how it all came down, but it depends upon who they were listening to at the time. Obviously, I mean, those things like this.
Both sides are boots on the ground.
Oh, absolutely, and they both have a proper perspective, but they just may not communicate with each other very well.